August 1974, Soviet mountaineer Elvira Shataeva sent a radio message. "Things are going so well, we're almost disappointed with the route." She and 7 other women were on Lenin Peak, a 7,134-meter mountain, the second highest in the entire Soviet Union. Shataeva's team didn't have a single man, and that was the whole point, to prove that women could take on dangerous, extremely challenging climbs without any help from men. But just 5 days later, a devastating tragedy shocked the entire world. Not a single woman survived. Their final message was just one word: forgive us. Hey everyone, my name is Tamer, and today I'm sharing a story that got women's mountaineering banned in the Soviet Union for years. It's a story that still sparks a lot of debate. What really happened to them? What or who caused the deaths of all 8? And did the fact that it was an all-female team play a role? Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and let's break down this story of horrifying climb, the Lenin Peak tragedy. Let's start with the obvious question. What made this climb so special? And why exactly did Shataeva believe her women-only team was a good idea? At the time, Shataeva was 35 years old and one of the most experienced female climbers in the Soviet Union. She originally graduated from the Moscow Art School, but her true passion turned out to be the mountains. This love for climbing began after she met her future husband, Vladimir Shataev, a mountaineering instructor. After their wedding, climbing became an obsession they shared. Elvira joined men's teams to conquer peak after peak in the Caucasus, and in the early 1970s, under her husband's guidance, she reached the highest point in the USSR, Communism Peak, standing at 7,495 meters. The thing is, Soviet climbers didn't get the chance to go beyond the Iron Curtain until the 1980s, so beyond that, there was nowhere higher to go within Soviet borders. But breaking records was still the goal. That's when Elvira came up with an incredibly ambitious plan to climb all of the Soviet Union's 7,000-meter peaks with a female-only team. She wanted to set a world record, to be the first. If you heard this story before, it probably went something like this. 8 women decided to challenge the norms, saying the mountains don't care if you're a man or a woman. And then, tragically, all 8 of them died. That's the version people in the Soviet Union told, and it's the same way it's remembered in modern Russia. But now, 50 years later, this story has taken an unexpected twist. Let me clarify. This tragedy was never as widely known, even in the Soviet Union, as say the mysterious Dyatlov Pass incident. But that's not just because Soviet propaganda generally avoided talking about tragedies, especially those tied to attempts at setting world records. As it turns out, the main reason was something much bigger. In 2024, Elvira Shataeva, the 9th member of Shataeva team, finally broke her silence. She was supposed to be part of the expedition in 1974, but didn't join the final climb at the very last moment, and was the only one who survived. For decades, she stayed silent, keeping to herself what she knew about the events leading up to the tragedy. But now, in her later years and after surviving a severe case of COVID, she finally shared her side of the story. According to her, everything you've ever heard about Shataeva team is wrong. So, what's the real story? One thing is absolutely clear. Shataeva didn't just want to summit the peak with her only woman team. She was determined that no man would step in to help or back them up in any way. A man can never truly understand what a woman has to go through to prove she's equal, Elvira once said. Here's what Vladimir Shataev wrote about his wife in his memoir, Category of Difficulty. "I've seen her during climbs, and I know she won't fall behind. She won't let anyone down with the belay, and she'll make it a point to keep up with a man, refusing any kind of concessions or leniency. I understand the principles of athletes like her. Nothing will make them follow in the tracks of a previous group, not even the threat of death. They'll wait until the tracks are completely erased." How controversial was her position at the time? Well, pretty controversial. And that's despite the fact that gender equality and feminist ideas were officially promoted in the Soviet Union long before many Western countries. Since the 1930s, the image of a woman as a hard-working labor hero, a scientist, a pilot, or even a leader had been widely accepted and encouraged in Soviet culture. But even in the 70s, women in mountaineering were still a rarity. Master of Sport Elvira Shataeva shared in an interview that women were rarely included in expeditions. She recalled that when her team won a mountaineering competition, the state commission was baffled. Their reaction, shocked that the team had succeeded even though, and I quote, "there was a woman in the crew." None of the official documents explicitly stated this attitude toward women in mountaineering, but the unspoken belief was clear. Tough routes weren't for women. Still, women like that did exist, and Elvira Shataeva was one of them. The idea to climb a 7,000-meter peak first came to her in 1971, 3 years before the actual expedition. But why Lenin Peak and not, say, Communism Peak, the tallest mountain in the USSR? Did it even matter which mountain this woman decided to conquer? Lenin Peak, standing at 7,134 meters, is one of the tallest mountains in Central Asia. It's located in the Pamir mountain range, right on the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. But, as I mentioned earlier, it was the second highest peak in the USSR. Now, the decision to climb Lenin Peak wasn't random. And for anyone thinking that Shataeva's team took on an impossible challenge, let me explain. Despite its massive size, Lenin Peak is considered a technically straightforward mountain to climb. Lenin Peak was known as one of the safest 7,000-meter mountains in the USSR. Climbers used to joke, you could bring kids here to go sledding. So, the decision to climb it wasn't risky, nor wasn't it mean to push their endurance to the limit. They chose it because it was the safest option. In fact, in the first 45 years of people climbing Lenin Peak, not a single death had been recorded. But everything changed in 1974. That year, the quiet mountain turned deadly. Its slopes were buried under heavy snow, and the weather was unusually brutal. On July 25, Harry Olin, one of America's top climbers, was killed in an avalanche, making him the mountain's first recorded victim. Just days later, in early August, the mountain claimed another life. Swiss climber Eva Isenschmidt, exhausted and unable to continue, she froze to death. Despite the unexpected deaths on what was considered an easy mountain, Elvira didn't abandon her plan. Her team included 8 other women: Tatiana Bardasheva, who had already summited Lenin Peak once before; Galina Perikhadik, the only mother in the group; Valentina Fatieva, an experienced climber from Moscow; Nina Vasilyeva, Elvira Shataeva's right hand; Elsia Mohamedova, a highly skilled climber from Tajikistan; Ludmila Manjarova from Kyrgyzstan; Elmira Grumazova, the team's backup member; and Irina Lubimtseva. Lubimtseva was known in the team for her calm, rational approach to any situation. But tragically, she was the first to lose her life even before the summit attempt. Her death would later be seen as one of the key factors that led to the tragedy of the entire team. Why? I'll get to that in a bit. For now, let's go over their plan. The route they planned was ambitious. Ascend while Lipking Rock, reach the summit of Lenin Peak, then descend through Razdelnaya Peak. This type of climb is called a traverse. Instead of coming back down the same way you went up, you cross over another peak on the way down. Traverse is tough, requires advanced skills, and is considered more prestigious in mountaineering. But it also means carrying heavier gear. Every gram counts at 7,000 meters, and that added weight can be a huge challenge. Plus, traverse leaves almost no time for rest, making it even more grueling. But Shataeva's team was ready. In 1973, as part of their preparation, Elvira organized and led a women's expedition to conquer the legendary Mount Erzba in Georgia. Erzba stands at 4,710 meters, known for its iconic twin peaks and the narrow pass between them. This mountain is only for advanced climbers. Beginners don't even attempt it. After summiting one peak, the women, with almost no rest, went straight for the second, which offered no chance to recover either. The steep rock wall rises at a sharp angle, making it an intense climb, and they pulled it off. There's no question, every single member of the team was highly experienced. The very fact that they were approved for such a demanding expedition speaks volumes about their skills and determination. But a 7,000-meter mountain is a completely different challenge. The day before the ascent of Lenin Peak, Elvira's husband, Vladimir Shataev, urged her not to push too hard. He told her that if anything went wrong, she should turn back immediately. Vladimir said, "If you see anyone reaching their limit, Leave the gear and tents at 7,500 meters. Go for the summit and come back the same way you went up. Forget the traverse. Promise me." To this, Elvira replied, "Of course, Valoria. If anyone gets sick, the summit won't matter. We'll start descending right away." But then she added, "But if we make it to the summit, we won't back out of the traverse. You have to understand, it would be awkward for us to do so. Now, if the base suggests it, that's different. We won't hide anything. We'll report everything as it is. The base here means the base camp. Every mountain that's regularly climbed has one. It's where climbers acclimate, train, and prepare for their ascent. The people at base camp monitor everything happening on the mountain, including weather updates. In an emergency, the base camp serves as the central point for communication, coordinating rescue operations and making critical decisions. Shataeva's team also had this kind of radio communication with their base camp. On August 2nd, Shataeva's team set off on their climb. Everything we know about their journey comes from their radio communications with base camp. These conversations let us piece together the events almost minute by minute. But here's the twist. Those very radio transmissions are what made people start questioning the official story of what really happened to the women. August 2nd, the team reported back to base camp. Everything was going great. The weather was perfect, the climb was easy, and everyone was feeling fine. Everything is going so well. We're almost disappointed with the route. Elvira radioed in at 1 p.m. At the time, there were 5 men's teams climbing nearby. 3 Russian, 1 American, and 1 Japanese. This didn't sit well with Shataeva's team. They worried that having men so close would take away from the significance of their achievement. There's even a theory that Vitaly Abalakov, a legendary Soviet mountaineer managing the base camp, asked the men's teams to stay near the summit to quietly keep an eye on Shataeva's group, just in case. But Shataeva didn't want any help from the men, so she came up with a plan. On the morning of August 3rd, at 8 a.m., she radioed the base and said her team had decided to take a break and delay their summit attempt by a day. This tweak changed the entire timeline of their climb, and as we'll later see, this wasn't the only last-minute change. When Shataeva informed base camp about the delay, their response was simple. "Whatever you decide is fine." They also added, "The weather forecast looks good." This would later become a critical detail, raising a lot of questions. But at the time, the woman got the green light for an extra night of rest and stayed put. Quick side note, climbing Lenin Peak is typically done in stages. Mountaineers use several intermediate camps along the way, with the final camp, known as the assault camp, located at 6,500 meters. That's where the women stayed to rest. But let's be real, resting at that altitude isn't exactly relaxing. To function properly above 6,000 meters, you need solid acclimatization. Without it, your body can start to break down from altitude sickness. We're talking nausea, vomiting, muscle weakness, and even hallucinations. And the scariest part, it can lead to deadly conditions like brain swelling or pneumonia. On August 4th, the women's team finally geared up for the summit. Strangely, they started their climb pretty late in the day, and no one really knows why. Around 5 p.m., Shataeva radioed base camp with an update. The weather was taking a turn for the worse. It was snowing, despite the forecast saying otherwise. But here's the surprising part. The women didn't see this as a bad thing. Instead, they took it as a good sign, thinking the snow will cover the tracks of the other teams, so no one can say we're just following in their footsteps. At this point, one of the men's teams was really close to where the women were climbing. They reached out to base camp asking if they should stick around to back up Shataeva's group or leave them to climb on their own. Base camp's response, according to the radio logs, was, "Shataeva's team is fine, continue your descent." After that, no one was left to support or monitor Shataeva's group. The next day, August 5th, at 5 p.m., Elvira Shataeva radioed in with the big news. "We're at the summit." After receiving congratulations, the team was wished a safe descent. But in the very next message, Elvira shared some troubling news. Let me share the transcript of that conversation. Shataeva: Visibility is bad, about 20-30 meters. We are unsure about the direction for the descent. We've decided to set up the tents, which we've already done. Tents are set up tandem style, and we're settled in. We're hoping to get a clearer view of the descent route once the weather improves. Base. I agree with that decision. If visibility is that bad, it's better to wait it out. Worst case, spend the night right there at the summit if it's possible. Shataeva. The conditions are manageable, even though the weather isn't great. The wind's constant, just like they said it would be. I don't think we'll freeze. Hopefully, the night won't be too rough. I'm feeling fine. Base. It's uncomfortable and definitely cold at the summit. The wind is likely to stay the same, if not get worse. Try to get an early start, scout the descent route, and if possible, begin hitting down right away. Good night, and stay safe. So, what do we take away from this conversation? Elvira Shataeva told Basecamp that visibility was terrible and decided her team would spend the night at 7,000 meters. Here's the thing. Staying overnight at the summit in sub-zero temperatures is extremely dangerous. And let's not forget, 7,000 meters is what climbers call the death zone for a reason. At that altitude, the human body can't recover or properly rest. Instead, it starts to slowly shut down due to a lack of oxygen. That's why climbers can only spend a short amount of time there, 2 to 3 day max, and even that's only with excellent training and acclimatization. Without it, death is inevitable. In their conversation, Basecamp seems to downplay the situation, acting like everything is under control and the women are in no real danger. But in reality, the clock was already ticking for Shataeva's team. Despite this, Basecamp didn't sound the alarm, likely relying on Shataeva's experience and the skills of her team. The next morning, the weather didn't improve. In fact, it got worse. A powerful windstorm hit, a full-on mountain hurricane, leaving them completely blind to their surroundings. A hurricane in the mountains is far more dangerous than one on the ground. As Vladimir Shataev once put it, a person caught in it is like a gnat sucked into a vacuum cleaner. Taking shelter in their tents, Elvira Shataeva radioed Basecamp at 10 a.m. on August 6. Shataeva. The weather hasn't changed at all. There is zero visibility. We got up at 7 a.m. and have been monitoring the conditions, waiting for a break in the fog to figure out our descent. But now it's 10 a.m. and still nothing. No improvement. Visibility is still about 20 meters. Why would you advise us to do it, Vitaly Mikhailovich? But in response to this urgent request for advice, Basecamp simply said, "Let's talk again at 1 p.m. For now, have something to eat." Let me jump ahead for a moment and talk about the hurricane on Lenin Peak. How could it be that Shataeva's team had no idea about the incoming storm? And did the other teams on Lenin Peak know what was coming? Because this wasn't just any storm. It turned out to be the worst storm in 25 years of USSR history. It was a massive, high-speed vortex, a giant spinning column of wind tearing across the continent and destroying everything in its path. The hurricane was so intense, it was being tracked by satellite and even featured on television news multiple times. So how could the Basecamp and the climbers on the mountain not have known about the hurricane? The truth is, they did know, but for some reason, not everyone was told. Why they kept it quiet, we may never know. But I'll share where the proof comes from that Basecamp knew about the storm. It's a story you don't want to miss, so stick around. Meanwhile, the climbers on the mountain only realized the hurricane was hitting them as it happened. This was confirmed by both the Soviet teams and the accounts of the Japanese climbers. Mountaineer Georgy Kuropanov, who was leading one of the groups that day, managed to save his team and several foreign groups thanks to his incredible experience and instincts. Without any prior knowledge of the incoming hurricane, he was able to sense the danger while in the fog and guide everyone down to a safer altitude just in time. But neither Kuropanov nor the Japanese climbers who rushed to help could reach Shataeva's group. The women were stuck at the summit, and climbing up in hurricane force winds was impossible. Despite this, the Japanese team, positioned 500 meters below the summit, still attempted a rescue. They pushed forward into the storm, searching for the women. After spending 2 hours battling the blizzard, they were forced to turn back empty-handed. At 1 p.m., Shataeva radioed Basecamp again. The weather hadn't improved, and the wind was even stronger. She wanted to start the descent, but base camp told her not to. Shataeva radioed, "We're ready to head out at any moment, but time has slipped by. Right now we're preparing lunch. We'll eat and stay ready so we can pick up in 10 to 15 minutes, no more." She asked again for recommendations and whether anyone was coming to help them. Basecamp responded that no one could reach them and once again told the woman to just wait. But Shataeva didn't give up. She asked, "If we're facing the monument, which direction should we go?" Basecamp responded, saying it was very difficult to give directions over the radio. There wasn't a clear descent route from their location. They explained that the team should only attempt to descend if they could find tracks left by previous groups. If there were no tracks and visibility was still zero, it would be safer to stay put and wait out the hurricane. Of course, by that point, there were no tracks from the previous groups. Everything was completely buried under the snow. The women had no choice but to sit tight, hoping the storm would let up. But by 5 p.m., their hope had turned into pure despair. Shataeva radioed base camp saying, "We're tired of being stuck here. It's so cold. We'd like to leave the summit and head down. We've lost hope that the weather will clear, and we just want to start descending. It's freezing up here, with strong winds and constant gusts. Before we begin, Vitaly Mikhailovich, we'd like to hear your advice on our plan. Also, we'd like to speak to the doctor on the radio. We have a question and need a consultation." Asking for the doctor was already a red flag, but what Shataeva revealed next made it even worse. When the base camp asked why they needed a doctor, she explained that one of the members, Irina Lebimtseva, had been vomiting after every meal for over 24 hours. Base camp's doctor, Anatoly Lyubusev, listened to the symptoms and said it was likely pneumonia. The news that one of the women was sick changed everything. This was a life-threatening situation, and there was only one option: descend immediately. Basecamp now demanded that the team start heading down as fast as possible, even with the hurricane-level winds and zero visibility. The doctor advised them to give medication to the sick climber, but then Shataeva dropped another bombshell. Another woman wasn't feeling well either. That made two sick team members. She told the doctor, "We're in a situation where we don't even know how to divide the medication." What does she mean by "we don't know how to divide the medication"? Does that mean the entire team of 8 had only one set of necessary meds? As hard as it is to believe, yes, that's exactly what it means. It sounds insane, but that was the reality of climbing expeditions in the Soviet Union at the time. In Elvira Shataeva's memoirs, she explained that back then, first aid kits weren't standard gear for mountaineering teams. Instead, climbers were expected to bring their own personal medical supplies. Grumazova had a small kit designed for 2 potential emergencies, but for some reason, the other woman didn't bring any kits at all. Before the climb, only Galina Perikolchik asked Grumazova for a single syringe and 1 dose of medication, probably assuming they wouldn't need it on the safe Lenin Peak. But when 2 climbers got sick at the same time, the team was faced with an impossible choice. When Vitaly Abalakov heard the news, he didn't hold back, reprimanding Shataeva over the radio. "I'm officially calling you out for not reporting the sick climber earlier. Follow the doctor's instructions immediately. Administer the injection and start descending via the Lipkin route right away." Shataeva's response was direct. "Understood. We'll give the injections now, pack up the tents and start descending in 15 minutes. As for the reprimand, I'd rather deal with that at base camp, not here on the summit." The timing for a reprimand couldn't have been worse, but it seems Abalakov let his emotions get the better of him. By the morning of August 7th, Shataeva made a devastating announcement. "Last night, at 11 p.m., during the descent, Irina Lyubusheva tragically passed away." This brings up a crucial question. Why did Shataeva, as the leader of the group, stay silent for an entire day about Lyubimtseva's condition? According to protocol, Shataeva should have reported Lyubimtseva's condition right away. The fact that she didn't has fueled several conspiracy theories about whether the woman lied and what really happened on that mountain. One of the most popular theories among those familiar with the tragedy is that Irina Lyubimtseva actually died before they reached the summit. The other women, determined to complete their mission at all costs, may have chosen to hide this from base camp. Some think this explains why they stayed at such a dangerous altitude for so long, delayed their descent, and started their summit push so late. There is a key detail supporting this theory, shared by Georgy Karipanov 2 years after the tragedy. It was mentioned in Anatoly Ferapontov's book, The Climbers, where the author interviewed witnesses to uncover what really happened. But no one was talking. Feraponov, who was on Lenin Peak at the time, gave this cryptic statement. "Everyone's lying about everything. That's not how it happened. But I won't tell you anything." The only detail he revealed was this. When his team approached the woman's tent at one of the intermediate camps, he tried to look into Shataeva's tent, but she quickly stopped him, leading him to the far side of the camp, offered him tea, and acted cheerful. At that point, there was supposedly a deadly bimtsova inside the tent. If that's true, imagine how demoralized the two must have been. Their mental state would have been completely shattered. Some believe this threw them into a panic, leading to bad decisions. It's also possible that other team members were already dealing with serious health problems before they even reached the summit. 15 minutes after Shataeva announced Lubimtsova's death, a rescue team of Soviet climbers left base camp despite the terrible weather. On their own initiative, French, British, and Austrian climbers also headed toward the peak. Meanwhile, the Japanese team, still at high altitude, made another attempt to reach women. Unfortunately, all of these efforts were unsuccessful. By 2 p.m., Shataeva sent another heartbreaking message to base camp. "Two more have died, Vasilieva and Fativa. The wind took our gear. There are 5 of us left, but we only have 3 sleeping bags. We're freezing. It's so cold. 4 of us have severe frostbite in our hands." The hurricane winds had ripped their tent apart and scattered their belongings. Base camp responded with the only advice they could give. "Keep moving down if you can. Don't give up. If you can descend, stay active. Keep moving in place. Try to check in every hour if possible." An hour later, the woman radioed again. "We're freezing. We can dig a snow cave. We have nothing to dig with. The wind blew our backpacks away." By 7 p.m., base camp contacted one of the nearby men's teams with a heartbreaking update. "The tragedy at the summit is nearing its end. They likely won't make it much longer. We'll update you during the morning check-in at 8 a.m. It looks like you'll need to head up." When they said the tragedy is nearing its end, it meant only one thing. The women on Shataeva's team were dying, one after another, and there was no hope of saving them. Even so, Basecamp kept receiving their radio messages and tried to keep them calm. At 8 p.m., they sent another message. "Dig a trench. Insulate yourself. Help will come tomorrow. Just hold on until morning." At 9 p.m., Galina Perikaduk's voice came over the radio. At first, there was silence, then sobbing, and finally, words that were hard to make out. After a long pause, she said something that sounded like "forgive us" or "forgiveness." Then came the devastating words. "There are only 2 of us left. We have no strength left. In 15, 20 minutes, we'll be gone." What they were asking forgiveness for, we'll never know. The radio clicked on a few more times after that, but all they could manage was pressing the button. The only sound left was the wind. All the women were gone. When the hurricane finally passed, the first climbers to reach the site were Americans and Japanese. They mapped out the scene, marking the locations of the bodies with red flags. But here's the eerie part. They only found 7 bodies. The 8th woman was missing. For a moment, it sparked hope that she might still be alive. Later, one of the Japanese climbers who worked on the map shared a chilling detail about what they found. When we got back to the tent later, Jack and I started hearing things. It sounded like a faint, sorrowful voice outside, like a woman calling out, but every time we stepped outside to check, all we heard was the cracking of the ropes under the weight of the snow. What was it? I'll leave that for you to decide. But sadly, the 8th woman didn't survive. Nina Vasilieva wasn't missing after all. The Japanese climbers simply didn't notice her. She was inside the torn tent, buried under Valentina Fativa's body. The Soviet search team was led by Vladimir Shataev, Elvira's husband, who rushed back to the Pamirs after the tragedy. He had left the camp a few days before the team began their ascent and returned only after the Swiss climber's death. It wasn't until he arrived back at the base that he learned what had happened to the women's team. When Vladimir arrived at the foot of the mountain, he noticed the somber mood. At first, he thought everyone was mourning the Swiss climber, but then he got the devastating news. Elvira's entire team was gone. Elvira's body was closest to the descent route. Vladimir approached his wife, stood silently for a moment, and then began the process of formal identification. Taking out his recorder, he pressed the record button and methodically described what he saw, just as protocol required. Blue anorak, crampons on her boots, no glasses, in her pockets a carabiner, a nail file, a pencil, and a small broken round mirror. The official report concluded that the main cause of the tragedy was the extreme and sudden weather conditions. Hurricane force winds, heavy snow, a sharp drop in temperature and air pressure, and zero visibility. In short, the women were caught off guard by the storm and froze to death. The investigation into the tragedy was quickly closed. The only real consequence: a long-standing ban that prevented women from climbing mountains over 2,000 meters without male supervision. Teams were limited to having no more than 2 women. That ban stayed in place for nearly 2 decades, right up until the collapse of the Soviet Union. So why ban women's climbing groups if, according to the official report, the tragedy wasn't about them being women? And how does they explain why every other team survived the storm but Shataeva's group didn't? How did such experienced climbers, all of them, end up in a completely helpless situation? And why didn't base camp warn them about the hurricane or insist they descend earlier? It feels like the investigation purposely avoided these questions, brushing it off as just a tragic accident. But here's the thing, these questions make you wonder, was it really the hurricane that killed them, or was there something more? What really happened to Shataeva's team? One theory discussed within the mountaineering community is that the women suffered from poor acclimatization. Combined with a rushed tactical plan for the climb and descent, this left them extremely vulnerable. Their lack of proper adjustment to the altitude likely played a major role in the tragedy. This idea gains weight when you consider that the first team member died before the hurricane hit and ripped through their camp, taking their tent and supplies. But here's the real question. How could such an experienced team miss something so crucial? 50 years later, Elvira Shataeva, the only surviving member of Shataeva's team, sheds light on what might have really happened. Whether you choose to believe her or not is up to you. By the time she told her story, Shataeva was in her 80s, recovering from COVID and recording her memoirs with the help of others. But so far, her version of events is the most detailed and logical alternative explanation we have. It doesn't answer everything, but it does explain a lot. Not just why the team set out without proper acclimatization, but also why Shataeva's group was the only one to perish during the devastating 1974 hurricane on Lenin Peak. According to Shataeva, bad luck followed Shataeva's team from day one all the way to the end. The original plan was for the team to spend weeks acclimating before the climb, gradually going up to higher altitudes and then coming back down to give their bodies time to adjust and recover. But here's what actually happened. During the team's acclimatization climb, disaster struck. On the night of July 24 to 25, an earthquake triggered an avalanche on Lenin Peak. That same avalanche killed Harry Allen, one of America's top climbers. That night, heavy snowfall trapped Shataeva's team in a snow cave at 5,200 meters. This was supposed to be their second acclimatization climb, with a goal of reaching 6,000 meters. According to experts, hitting 6,000 meters was a crucial step. It would have allowed their bodies to adjust to the altitude, making it possible to safely climb higher without getting sick. That's how it was supposed to go. But it didn't. Because of the avalanche and the tragedy, Shataeva's team cut their second acclimatization climb short and headed back down. Just a week later, they set out to traverse a 7,000-meter peak without spending a single night acclimating at 6,000 meters. For comparison, Lebedev's team, which was climbing Lenin Peak at the same time, had already completed 2 acclimatization climbs to 6,000 meters before their summit attempt. Shataeva's team, none, and yet, they ended up spending 5 straight days at that altitude, something their bodies simply weren't prepared for. The truth is, Shataeva's team wasn't even properly acclimated for a standard climb of Lenin Peak, a route where the assault camp is set at 6,000 to 6,400 meters. But for a traverse with overnight stays at 7,000 meters, the acclimatization requirements are much stricter. Those requirements, however, were ignored, all in an effort to avoid missing the climbing season. So, was the hurricane really to blame? Or is someone responsible for what happened? Shataeva is the only one who clearly states, Shataeva's team had official overseers. The real leaders of the expedition were Vitaly Balakov, who was in charge of the climb, and Elvira's husband, Vladimir Shataeva, who handled the gear. All major decisions, routes, equipment, logistics were made by these overseers. They had the final say on everything, and this was agreed upon from the start. According to Gurmazova, it was the gear, more than anything else, that turned out to be their biggest problem. The women were not provided with reliable high-altitude gear, specifically synthetic tents. Instead, they were issued 3 flimsy percale tents, known as pamirka. According to the plan set by their overseers, the 9 women were supposed to rely on 3 3-person percale tents made from lightweight cotton fabric with chemically treated roofs. But here's the problem. If the treatment wasn't done properly, these tents were prone to 2 major issues. They'd either leak along the ridge or the roof would tear apart completely. Now here's the shocking part. 2 out of the 3 tents were defective. This defect left the entire team without shelter in the brutal conditions of the storm. And ironically, it's also what saved Gurmazova's life. The issue with one of the tents came to light during one of their acclimatization climbs. It started leaking. Gurmazova writes, "After a night of rain, we were left with only 2 tents for 9 people. But for some reason, we were all confident there were backup tents waiting for us at base camp. As soon as they returned to camp, Elvira Shataeva called a team meeting. According to Gurmazova, she was visibly upset about losing one of the tents. It forced the team to switch to a less than ideal plan for the climb. Shataeva held out hope until the very last day that her husband would come through with a replacement tent. But it never happened. With 9 people and only 2 tents, there simply wasn't enough space for everyone. Gurmazova was left behind at base camp, a decision that ultimately saved her life. Oddly, this crucial detail was left out of the official reports. A quick note about the reports. In Soviet expeditions, all group meetings had to be documented, and Shataeva asked Gurmazova to handle this for their team. However, Gurmazova later revealed that referencing gear issues in the reports was discouraged. They deliberately avoided mentioning it. But still, they needed a reason to explain why Gurmazova was left behind. So why did they write? Team member incompatibility. That's the official explanation that went into the record. In reality, there was no incompatibility at all. Vladimir Shataeva himself wrote in his memoirs, "They operated like a well-trained ship's crew. Discipline, precision, adherence to the schedule, and a clear understanding of their duties and roles. Not once did we hear arguments or complaints, see sulking expressions, or notice judgmental glances. They worked together seamlessly. The second defective tent failed at the worst possible moment, high on the mountain. The hurricane winds ripped the roof right off, scattering all their gear and leaving the team with just 1 tent for the entire crew. With no backup shelter, no supplies, and no way to protect themselves from the storm, the women didn't stand a chance. They froze to death." But the most shocking revelation, according to the lone survivor, was the hidden weather report. Every base camp monitors weather updates daily. On August 2nd, the radio operator received a clear warning about the approaching hurricane, including the exact day it would hit Lenin Peak. Following protocol, the operator logged this warning in the radio journal every day for 5 days straight. But the climbers on the mountain never heard about it. Shataeva's team didn't get the warning, and neither did the other groups on Lenin Peak. The climbing overseer, Vitaly Balakov, chose not to share the hurricane forecast with anyone. At first, Gurmazova had no idea the weather warning was being kept from the team, because Balakov would leave the main area to talk to Shataeva over the radio in separate room. It wasn't until later, back in Leningrad, that she discovered the truth. When Gurmazova asked Georgy Karapanov, whose group, according to Balakov's plan, was supposed to provide backup for Shataeva's team, why they continued climbing despite the warning, his response stunned her. "Why did you all keep pushing for the summit when there had been a hurricane warning in camp since August 2nd? Karapanov, completely confused, said, "No one ever told us about hurricane warning. We thought the storm came out of nowhere. What else could this be but gross negligence? How could the overseer fail to share such a critical warning?" Remember, on the first day, when Shataeva asked for permission to delay their summit attempt by a day, Balakov approved it, saying the weather would be clear. And he wasn't wrong. Right before major hurricanes, there is often a brief weather window, with calm skies, sometimes even sunshine. That's exactly what they experienced. But how could Balakov not mention the incoming hurricane? History doesn't give us a clear answer. Maybe the pressure to make this climb a success, the first all-women's ascent of the 7,000-meter peak, was just too high and failure wasn't an option. Maybe he hoped they'd make it down in time. Or perhaps he simply forgot to share the forecast and, when he realized his mistake, decided to stay silent to avoid taking the blame. The truth? We'll probably never know. Looking back, Shataeva's radio conversations with base camp feel strangely incomplete, like parts are missing. And here's the thing, there are no actual recordings. What we have are reconstructions from Vladimir Shataev based on what others, mostly Abelkov, told him. The other witnesses, they've stayed silent, leaving the tragedy on Lenin Peak surrounded by unanswered questions. In the end, it's remembered as the story of 8 women who challenged gender stereotypes and paid the ultimate price. What do you think about the story of Shataeva's team? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. This has been Really Epic Stories, and I'm Dahmer. Take care, everyone.